Cool. So I'll go first. Thank you all for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Before leaving the stage to my colleague Saverio, will be the actual speaker of this talk, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce briefly our AI Center for Health, where we are a relatively small reality in the Humanitas Hospital in Rozzano, in Milan, born with the aim of designing, implementing, optimizing, applying artificial intelligence models for solving complex data science tasks in the healthcare. Our team is composed by 13 data scientists, one project manager, and one operative manager. And we feature several national and international collaborations with our work resulting in applications on several national and international conferences and journals as well. Can you change the slide, please? The source of our projects are threefold, let's say. We have internal projects where we mainly support Humanitas clinical research in designing and developing clinical activities, activities involving AI in general, and where we also identify and address criticisms for those activities. For example, we spend an extensive efforts in smoothing data cleaning and collection pipelines, for example, for enabling clinical research. Then we also have, international projects resulting in broader collaborations. We won European grants in which we foster our activities, but we also try to translate our activities from a pure research stage to a more industrial settings. And for this reason, we feature partnership with industry in general. Can you go on, please? So despite the vastity of microenvironments and subdomains leading to research projects in the Humanitas Hospital, we try to categorize our work in four main areas, namely diagnosis, involving several sources of data, including medical imaging, histopathology, health records, genomics, mainly for risk assessment and early detection of diseases. Then we have the personalized care area, including prediction of treatment efficacy and treatment response, as well as helping with statistical analysis in the clinical studies and research settings. We also have an area called workflow optimization, including the development of tools and methods to support the clinical procedures and research. So for example, I mentioned before data annotation platform and data collection pipelines. And finally, we have the generative AI and precision medicine area, which involves everything concerning synthetic data generation and digital twin research. And in this last area lies the work of Saverio and his team. So I conclude and I will leave to him the stage for presenting his amazing work in the field.
Thank you so much, Aldo. Thank you so much, all of you, also for the invitation to this, for attending this speech, but also for the interest in this field and the opportunity for us, for me and Aldo, to present our work within the Humanitas Research Project. As Aldo said, this concept of digital twin born in this area, there is a technology area, but application technology area, because generative AI is a brand new branch that started, I think, at least 2 or 3 years ago, with the opportunity that in terms of news and so on, that OpenAI and ChatGPT gives to us, because we actually started this journey in research on generative AI and synthetic data technology since 4 years ago. So we have the opportunity. We was lucky because the technology has a lot of growing in these years. So we can talk about this technology in the healthcare sector. Today, I want to present you our idea of digital twin, that of course is a more broad, is a more big big technology and big thing that collects a lot of area. With digital twin we can intend 3D model or 3D computational system or biologically or dynamics system and so on. But in our meaning, digital twin is a sort of software, data-driven software that can help the clinician take the decision. And in this sense, we are using generative AI to integrate a lot of multimodal information, clinical information, and create model that can simulate different patterns for single patients. So of course, the thing we are talking about artificial intelligence. I don't want to bore you because I know very well that you are experts on this field. But artificial intelligence is a very big box, and this is the big field of the study. Inside artificial intelligence, we can find machine learning, more deeper deep learning, and at least generative AI that you know very well is a branch of deep learning that use some particular model, generative model, that can help us to generate new data or create new data starting from a single input. In this sense, we are using generative AI for the particular opportunity of this technology to integrate different modalities of data, because you know better than me that in the healthcare sector we are talking about different data for a single patient. A single patient, a human patient, produce itself a lot of data: imaging, longitudinal data, signal data, laboratory analysis, continuous, categorical, and so on. So generative AI models, and in particular the multimodal technology like the large language model GPT-4, for example, can integrate different modalities: imaging, text, data, information, longitudinal data. So in this sense, this kind of model can help us to create something that integrate different sources of information to produce a simulation and information precisely for the individual patients. Of course, in the healthcare sector, we have a lot of product, a lot of technology things that we can do in terms of we use machine learning or deep learning or generative AI. We go from the generic medical product or medical device that use artificial intelligence to, for example, a survival model for survival assessment or patient stratification or diagnosis classification using a simple machine learning model, or more deeper, we can use deep learning for computer vision analysis, for example, in histopathological images or MRI imaging and something like that. And as I said before, we are using generative AI to precise task, which is synthetic data generation, predictive care, digital twin, and therapy optimization. Because as I said, this kind of model can help us integrate a lot of information, multimodal information. Basically, this is our idea and the approach that we propose in the terms of digital twin. As I told you before, we with digital twin intend a software, data-driven software that help us in predicting the health outcome of a single patient. So basically, we are using the artificial intelligence model to translate real-world data from the multimodal real-world data from individual patients to a model that can enable us to simulate different pathways of a single patient. And real-world data, help us to construct and build the model, and the model help us to understand embedding the real-world data. This is through the artificial intelligence. So this is basically the overall approach in our idea of digital twin. In a more detailed way, we are integrating different sources of data through artificial intelligence, and in particular, we are using synthetic data generation to generate a lot of information to fuel the digital twin model and enable patient prediction. For example, in our idea to generate an individual future outcome of a patient, we can generate synthetic data in 6 months, in 1 year after for a patient. We can simulate, for example, the outcome of single patient after taking a drugs or not taking drugs, or using a treatment or a placebo or something like that. So synthetic data for us is a way to fuel the digital twin models and to create the outcome prediction. In the same way, the digital twin model, the patient or a clinician can read the digital twin model through an explainable artificial intelligence approach, because these models are we have a lot of complexity on this model. So for an healthcare point of view, we have to build an explainable and interface that enable the clinician to read the outcome of the model. So that's basically our approach. We are using, just to summarize, the multimodal real data of the patients. We are using synthetic data generation to integrate this kind of information and fuel the digital twin model. And we are using the digital twin model to predict and simulate different pathway for a patient that can be used as a clinical decision support system through explainable artificial intelligence to the clinician. This is the overall idea. In other words, we are integrating different layers of information, clinical, genomic, images, textual information. We collect as data, as different data sources, this kind of information. We create different synthetic model, different synthetic generative model, and we can build a digital twin through synthetic data generation to assess three different big part of the healthcare and the medical sector, which is the diagnosis. So we are using this model to predict diagnosis of the patients, prognostic, personalized prognostic assessment, which is we can use this model to predict and simulate the evolution and the behavior of disease in a single patient. And then last but not least, the therapy optimization, because we can construct different pathways, different scenarios of therapy in a single patient, and the clinician can see and can choose the right pathway to optimize the survival, for example, of a single patient. In this sense, the more interesting part and the more important part is the synthetic data generation. Synthetic data generation, as you know very well, is a new kind of technology which uses generative model to create artificial data starting from real-world data. So basically, synthetic data is an artificial data that respects all of the statistical property of a real data, but in a privacy-preserving mode and in a more effective way. With synthetic data, we can create an augmented data set. We can create more data, more conditional data, which means that we can balance the different classes in a database, and we can create structured data without missing data, and with the possibility to create also longitudinal data, so we can predict the future outcome of a single patient. In a very few words, in a nutshell, synthetic data, the process to create synthetic data is basically divided in three main stages. The first one, we analyze the different source of data. We can choose the right model to fit this source of data, and then we fit and we train this model with real world data. Then we detach the generative model, and we can use this model to produce as data as we want. Of course, structured data, longitudinal data, and data without missing opportunity. More important thing is not the generative process, the training of the algorithm, but the most important part is the clinical validation of our model, because we have to be sure that our synthetic data generated is clinically validated, and that can be used, and that we can use this kind of data to make prediction and to build a digital twin. That's the reason why we created this synthetic validation framework. This framework, but also the generative model, is published on a scientific journal, clinical journal. So you can find all of the information on the web, just searching for Humanitas or our name and synthetic data. So basically, this kind of synthetic validation framework is built on the three main pillars. So to be sure that the synthetic data can be a private copy, can be a proxy of the real data, so that respect all the clinical information with the respect of the clinical real data set. Second one, that synthetic data can be used to accelerate transitional research, improving prognostic model, for example, using that data augmentation that can enhance the numerosity of a data set or that can balance some classes that are misrepresenting in the real data. And last, our framework assess if the use of synthetic data can actually use for simulation, for example, in clinical trial. As you know, clinical trial right now is the only way to validate a medical product. From a drug to a medical device, everything related to the medical sector have to pass through a clinical trial to be sure that this is valid for the human purposes. In this sense, as you can see in a clinical trial, basically we split the population in two. The first one that actually taking the drugs or the medical device, and the second one as a control group. With a treatment, with a placebo, something like that. We want to be sure that with this technology we can use the synthetic data, the digital twin, as a proxy to the control group. So we perform an experiment to use synthetic data as a proxy to the control group, so we can avoid the collection of real patients for the control group of clinical trial. Talking about results of this validation framework, we are using synthetic data to as a proxy as the real data, and as a validation framework. For example, we are recreating some survival clinical model for a specific healthcare domain, which is the hematological sector, and in particular with the myelodysplastic syndrome data. This is a chronic condition of the acute myeloid leukemia, and basically we build some survival model in terms of prediction of the survival probability of individual patients, and we perform the validation between the real data and the synthetic data using a digital twin technology in predicting the survival probability of the patients. As you can see from the plot A on the left, using real data or synthetic data, so building a digital twin based on synthetic data, basically perform the same results. So this told us that if in the future we will use the digital twin synthetic data, basically we can obtain the same results as the real one. Same things with respect to the patients distribution in terms of WHO classification. WHO is something that allows information about the diagnosis of a single patients, of course related to this hematological disease, and also in this case using real or synthetic and digital twin models, we have at least the same results also in terms of classification. Using this tool for accelerate the clinical research, we perform this experiment basically starting from a real patients cohort from 2014. Here's we recreate an augmented data set or more or less 3,000 patients, and comparing it with the real data set collecting in 7 years from the 2014 here. Of course, synthetic data can accelerate the collection of these patients because, as I told you before, the synthetic data generation process is something that is really time effective and cost effective. So we can instantly create synthetic data starting from a real cohort. So in this sense, we collected the same results using the real data. So which means that using this technology can actually enable us to avoid 7 years of collecting patients. So this is a great result that also we have published in some clinical journal. And last but not least, in terms of using this model for a clinical trial, as I told you before, we conducted this study in using a synthetic control arm in terms of the real control arm in a clinical study of a drug which is called luspatercept, also for the treatment of myelodysplastic syndrome patients, which I told you before is a chronic condition of acute myeloid leukemia. In this experiment, we are using our generative technology to create patients, to create data patients to use in a control trial, to use in a clinical trial as control group. After we create our synthetic control group, we looking for the clinical endpoint of the study, not only in terms of survival, as you can see in plot A and B, in terms of survival and longest transfusion period of a single patient, but also in clinical endpoint, which means some clinical information regarding the laboratory analysis, for example, the count of blood cells after 8 and 12 weeks after taking the drugs. Basically, in our correlation in the comparison study between using real control group and synthetic control group, we obtained the same results, which means that using synthetic data can actually provide us the same results as the real one, so we can actually avoid the collection of the real control group, which means to avoid the time and cost in collecting real patients. I talked you before multimodal synthetic data generation for our digital twin, which means that we actually can create also synthetic images starting from another modality, which is the text. This is the same technology as OpenAI DALL-E, because this is a sort of diffusion model, which is called stable diffusion model, I think version number 2, that we customize using a custom text encoder model, which is BERT, trained on Humanitas data regarding hematological domain. With this model, we are using the text information of a single patient to provide information and to create synthetic histopathological data. We use after for predicting individual patient outcome, predicting the evolution of the single disease, and predicting, for example, the probability of evolution, for example, of myelodysplastic syndrome in actually acute myeloid leukemia. Because the main aim of this kind of technology, of this kind of approach, is to predict for a single patient, an individual patient, the risk in the evolution of the disease, and maybe to provide the doctor a way to propose to a patient the effective drugs or the effective treatment, avoiding the evolution of the disease. With this model, as I told you, we use a custom version of a text encoder, which means that also we are using the text information, the medical text information of a single patient that actually represents the 97% of the total amount of healthcare data, which are currently unused for a hospital, to provide more information to the digital twin model to predict the individual healthcare outcome. In this example, we also, for validating this technology, we used this model to clusterize the patients according to not only the disease, but also according to the treatment path of an individual patient. We used our text encoder model to classify the patients in different clusters and then validate this cluster, looking for the real disease, the real diagnosed disease for the clinician for this single patient. As you can see, the color of the single dot represent the actual disease of the patient, and the colors, the labeled colors of the single cluster are the cluster identified by our text encoder. As you can see, the text encoder can recreate the actual cluster for the disease. I think about cluster 0 or cluster 4, which represent, for example, more MPN patients, which is another condition, a precondition of leukemia, but create some different cluster, like cluster 2, with different patient with different disease. But if you are looking for the single history of this patient, we can see that yes, it's true that these patients have different disease, but these patients have a common response to this disease, and this is something that actually can help the clinician in providing and suggest the same therapy, for example. the same therapy also in this condition of different diagnosis and different disease. So in this sense, this model was agnostic to the actual disease, but are looking for different complexity in the data that maybe can help us to looking for the most suitable treatment, agnostic to the disease, to provide to the individual patient. All of this technology, all of these generative data and generative model, as I told you, create our digital twin, and we are using this digital twin as a clinical decision support system, which is a tool, a computer-based tool that can help the clinician in making decision, but providing them, of course, specific patient information and simulate different scenarios for help clinicians in taking their decision. Of course, this technology is completely safety for the patient because we don't have to provide any drugs or patient or any treatment. We can simulate the treatment, the patient in different modality and looking for the different outcomes for the patient, because as I show you, we can see the actual results of the drugs of the treatment in the imaging of the patient, looking for imaging data, or in the laboratory analysis, or in the survival model, something like that. Basically, this kind of model, which for us is the digital twin, can integrate different historical and individual historical data from the patient, integrate like a large language model, the domain knowledge from the internet, from PubMed and Wikipedia, then can use the algorithm for the survival prediction or patient classification or clusterization, and then can provide patient-specific advice in terms of result and advice for a doctor and the clinician. An example of this implementation, this model that we can carry out in the last 2 years, and that we can finally publish in the Journal of Clinical Oncology and was accepted 1 month ago, is the first implementation of the digital twin as a clinical decision support system in the field of hematology, and in particular to define the optimal timing of transplantation, stem cell transplantation in patients affected from myelodysplastic syndrome. As I told you before, myelodysplastic syndrome is a chronic condition of the acute myeloid leukemia, but it's a chronic condition that can stand in a single patient also for 10 years, 20 years, with a moderate quality of life. But the most critical thing is that myelodysplastic syndrome can actually turn in acute myeloid leukemia, which is a very critical condition for a patient because the survival time with a patient with acute myeloid leukemia can be also 3 months, 6 months. But there is a cure there is a specific treatment to the myelodysplastic syndrome, which is the stem cell transplantation. With the stem cell transplantation, a patient can actually be cured by this disease and with complete remission. But the critical thing is that stem cell transplantation is something really toxic for the patient, with 30% of death for a single patient. So the question for the clinician is, for an individual patient, is better to let the myelodysplastic syndrome naturally evolve, which means that we can wait 20 years of life and something like that, but with the problem of maybe translate to acute myeloid leukemia, or it's better to perform allogeneic stem cell transplantation, risking the toxicity of the treatment. We used our digital twin and clinical decision support system to predicting the evolution of the patient without the treatment. So starting for individual patient information like the genomic profile, the demographic information, history of the patient from anamnesis taken from the medical report, we create a model based on digital twin, generative AI, and also multi-stage Markov model to predict the survival path of the patient without the treatment, dividing them in 4 main age range. For example, you can see that the curve showing this graph basically showed the behavior, the simulation of the survival probability of a single patient divided in four range of age, and also in different risk group of myelodysplastic syndrome, which is the color of the single curve. As you can see, for example, in an elderly patient, this part of the graph, for an elderly patient with a very high myelodysplastic, with a very high risk myelodysplastic syndrome, basically the curve of the survival tendency, the tendency of the survival probability decrease over time from 0 to 36 months, which means that it's better to transplant early with respect to wait the evolution of the disease, because waiting the evolution of the disease means losing survival probability for a single patient. Different things for a young patient, also with a very high risk of myelodysplastic syndrome, because the evolution of the survival increase, not decrease. So it's better to wait to transplant instead of taking the early transplantation for this single patient. So this is basically the first implementation for a digital twin for clinical decision support system with a use case of myelodysplastic syndrome. Of course, we are talking about different generative model. We are talking about a lot of clinical data that, you know, is a very critical situation because data of the patient is critical. So for not only because we are working in a hospital, so we have to respect, for example, guidance of ethics and governance, but all of these models respect these rules, so the 2021 rules from the WHO guidance for the healthcare sector. So which means basically that we have to build model with a transparent technology. We have to build a model, a reliable model, and of course we have to be sure that protection of data and data sharing are respected in terms of privacy preservation. In conclusion, let me talk about the explainable approach, because it's something that is essential for a clinician to understand. For example, in the application for myelodysplastic syndrome treatment, it's very important for the clinician to understand how the model working and why the model are taking this decision instead of another. Basically, the process for AI approach for building an AI model, a traditional approach, is to use a training data set, create a machine learning process, which means taking data, dividing in training and test, train the model, and then making tests, and then create the learning function, the learning model. But in this sense, the learning model create decision or recommendation for the clinician, which is very difficult to understand because we don't know why the model taking this decision, something like that. With an explainable artificial intelligence approach, we are creating from scratch for the first stage of the development process something that is explainable in the terms of the model have to explain to the doctor which parameter, what parameters the model taking in consideration to this decision. And of course, we have to create an explainable interface because, you know, clinicians have to use in a very easy way this technology because it's something that need to help the clinician and not to implement difficult. For the explainable model approach, for example, we are using different technology. There are a lot of technology that doing this. For example, SHAP is one Python library that can help us in open the black box of a single model. And for example, in terms of classification or to explain to the clinician, which is the feature that drive the classification or drive the patient's simulation, we can use this tool to explain, for example, that genomic information, genomic mutation, for example, or gene SF3B1 drive the model in predicting the survival or drive the model in create a different scenario for the patient. also for an individual patient. So in this sense, we can help clinician in understand, okay, the model are taking into account something that is clinically valuable, something that is biologically relevant. And in conclusion, for the part of explainable interface, of course, we are in a hospital. We are in Humanitas University, Humanitas Hospital. So we have to create, as I told you, something that is easy readable and easy usable for the clinicians. In this sense, this is an example of the implementation of the digital twin clinical decision support system for the allogeneic stem cell transplantation. As you can see, the clinicians also for a preliminary analysis can put into the model the age of the patients and then the molecular risk associated to the disease, and then can calculate the single curve that I showed before in terms of evolution of individual outcome for the myelodysplastic syndrome. And in this sense, the model provides the clinician a support in the decision, a suggestion. For example, as you can see, as far as the curve increase, so the survival probability increase without the treatment, the tool suggests to the clinician to delay the allogeneic stem cell transplantation. Something similar is for the synthetic data generation. We are using internally this kind of tool for clinician research and bioinformatician and something like that, because we have this platform that enable us to create as far as we want data from research purposing or for data sharing, to share data with partner, to share data inside a consortium and something like that. So this in conclusion is the work that we have done so far, the work in terms of digital twin, and why we are using, how we are using this generative model to build something for the clinical sector and to build something that can be useful to the clinician. And so on. I want, in conclusion, to thank you, of course, for the opportunity to present our work, and I want also to stress the fact that this is something that is possible between the integration from a clinical team and a technical and technology team, because it's essential to identify the clinical question, is essential to identify the unmet clinical need, and then find the technology, the right technology to answer this need, because otherwise it is completely useless to try to apply different technologies to all of the healthcare sector. So that's why we in Humanitas, we are inside Humanitas. That's why the AI Center born inside Humanitas and very very close to the clinical part. I cannot hear you.
My bad, I forgot to turn the mic on, so I was